Do you remember the weekend activities you did in the 1970s if you were poor, when imagination made fun free? Families with little money found joy in play and togetherness, proving the simplest moments created the memories that lasted longest. Riding bikes around the neighborhood all day was one of the greatest thrills of being a kid in the 1970s, especially if you grew up poor. No helmets, no fancy gear, and certainly no store-bought accessories, just a two-wheeled hand-me-down that had probably already lived through 3 kids before you. You hopped on in the morning, maybe with a sandwich stuffed in your pocket if your mom thought ahead, and you rode until the streetlights flicked on. There were no smartphones buzzing in your pocket, no parent tracking apps, and no worries about gas money. Your bike was your freedom, your entertainment, and your ticket to endless adventure. The sidewalks were racetracks, the cracked pavement was your test of skill, and the neighborhood itself was a map of shortcuts, hidden dirt trails, and back alley challenges. Sometimes you would ride alone, but more often than not, you had a gang of kids on mismatched bikes flying behind you, racing to the end of the block, daring each other to go faster, to ride without holding the handlebars, or to coast downhill with your legs outstretched. A cheap bell on the handlebar or playing card clipped to the spokes was enough to make you feel like you owned the road. And when the evening came, when your legs ached from pedaling and the sweat dried to salt on your face, you would lean your bike against the porch and collapse into bed with the kind of exhaustion only kids seem to know. For kids who did not have much, those battered old bicycles were more than toys. They were the perfect escape. Stickball or kick the can was about as bare bones as it gets when it comes to entertainment, but it was the stuff of pure magic. The rules were made up as you went. The equipment was whatever you could find, and the playing field was just the street, the empty lot, or maybe the alley behind your house. All you needed was a stick, an old tennis ball, or maybe just an empty can that had once held beans. You drew bases with chalk or scratched them into dirt, and the whole neighborhood became your stadium. It did not matter if you had 10 kids or only 3. The game always worked, because imagination filled in the gaps. When money was scarce and parents were stretched thin just to keep food on the table, games like this gave kids something priceless. Laughter that echoed down the block, the joy of competition, and the feeling that you were part of something bigger than yourself. The can would clang across the pavement, rolling unpredictably as everyone scrambled to chase it, shouting and laughing so hard your stomach hurt. Sometimes the game went on until the sun dropped low, until you could barely see the ball in the fading light. Sometimes neighbors came out to yell about the noise or about a dented trash lid, but even that became part of the fun. These games did not cost a penny, yet they became memories that lasted a lifetime. Looking back, they were more than just street games. They were proof that even in the leanest years, joy did not have a price tag. Homemade slip-and-slides in the backyard were the kind of genius invention only kids could dream up in the 1970s. Forget about the expensive plastic versions sold in stores. You had old black trash bags, a garden hose, and a little bit of dish soap. You spread the bags out across the patchy grass, weighed down the corners with rocks, and sprayed the whole thing until it gleamed with water and suds. The first kid to take a running dive down that slick surface either slid gracefully or wound up with a grass burn, but either way, everyone cheered. Parents shook their heads, warning about broken bones, but as long as nobody cried too loudly, the fun kept going. Sometimes the soap made the slide extra foamy, and you would come up at the end covered head to toe in bubbles, looking like you had just been through a car wash. If you were lucky, your neighbors joined in, and suddenly half the block was waiting in line to take a turn. The trash bags ripped constantly, and you had to patch them together or add more, but no one cared. It was not about perfection. It was about cooling down in the heat, laughing until your belly ached, and proving that you did not need money for joy. On the hottest summer weekends, those makeshift water parks felt like heaven. Looking back, it was reckless, messy, and just about perfect. Family picnics with bologna sandwiches were the highlight of many weekends, even if they were simple affairs. There was no fancy catering, no store-bought fried chicken in a bucket, and definitely no elaborate spreads. Mom wrapped bologna sandwiches in wax paper, maybe tossed in some potato chips from a half-empty bag, and grabbed a jug of lemonade or sweet tea. The cooler was dented, the blanket had holes, and the ants always seemed to find you no matter where you sat. But the magic was in the togetherness, not the menu. Families piled into cars that rattled with every mile, drove to the nearest park, and claimed a patch of grass like it was their private retreat. Kids ran wild, playing tag, climbing trees, or daring each other to roll down hills, while parents relaxed in the shade, chatting and keeping an eye out. Sometimes you had neighbors join in, and the picnic turned into a whole community event with food swapped back and forth. There were no restaurant bills, no worrying about whether the kids would like what was served. Everyone ate the same thing, and somehow those sandwiches, humble as they were, tasted like the best thing in the world. For poor families in the 1970s, those picnics were more than meals. They were moments of joy carved out of struggle, a chance to feel rich in laughter, even if your wallet said otherwise. Collecting glass bottles for refunds was one of the cleverest ways kids in poor families turned free time into pocket money. The system was simple enough. Soda bottles, milk bottles, even beer bottles could be returned for a small deposit, usually a nickel each. That may not sound like much now, but back then, it was enough to buy candy, a soda, or even start saving for something bigger. So, on weekends, kids grabbed old sacks or wagons and roamed the streets, scanning ditches, empty lots, and trash bins for the glint of glass. Some made it into a competition. Whoever collected the most bottles earned bragging rights for the week. Of course, there were always a few scrapes and cuts from handling broken glass, but nobody thought twice about it. Returning the bottles meant standing at the counter of the corner store, trading in your collection for a handful of coins that felt like treasure. Sometimes you even spent it right there on penny candy, savoring the reward of your scavenger hunt. Parents encouraged it too, because it kept kids busy, taught responsibility, and put a little extra into the family budget without costing anything. In the 1970s, when money was tight, even a handful of nickels could brighten a kid's weekend. Walking to the public library was a quiet adventure, one that cost nothing but time and offered rewards beyond measure. For kids who could not afford movie tickets or new toys, the library was a palace filled with treasures stacked floor to ceiling. The smell of old books, the hush of turning pages, and the cool blast of air conditioning in the summer made it feel like a sanctuary. You might walk in with no plan, wander the aisles, and come out with a stack of mysteries, adventures, or comic collections that kept you busy all week. Story time was another highlight, with groups of kids gathered cross-legged on the floor, hanging on every word as a librarian brought characters to life. Some kids treated the library as a social hangout too, meeting friends at the long wooden tables and whispering over magazines they were not supposed to bend. For parents, it was free childcare, a safe space where they could trust their children to spend hours learning or simply escaping into imagination. A library card was more valuable than any wallet full of bills because it opened doors to entire worlds without costing a cent. In the 1970s, especially for families with little money, the library was proof that joy, knowledge, and wonder were available to anyone willing to walk through the doors. Watching free cartoons on Saturday morning was a ritual that united kids across the country, rich or poor. But if you grew up without much, those hours in front of the television were extra special. No cable packages, no pay-per-view movies, just the handful of channels that came in through the antenna on top of the house. You woke up before your parents, poured yourself a bowl of cereal, sometimes with more sugar than milk, and planted yourself in front of the screen. Bugs Bunny, Scooby-Doo, and the rest of the lineup became your weekend friends, keeping you glued for hours while the world outside slowly woke up. The shows were free, the laughs were endless, and for those few hours you forgot about everything else. Poor families did not need fancy trips or paid entertainment when Saturday morning promised a guaranteed escape. Sometimes the television flickered or the picture went fuzzy, and you had to fiddle with the antenna until the signal came back. Sometimes the commercials were almost as entertaining as the shows, with jingles that stuck in your head long after the weekend ended. Looking back, it was simple, almost too simple. But for kids in the 1970s, Saturday morning cartoons were a kind of magic money could not buy. Board games missing half the pieces were a staple of family weekends, and no one ever seemed to mind. Maybe the dice were lost, maybe the hotels in Monopoly were replaced with buttons, or maybe you were using scraps of paper to stand in for pawns. The important thing was not whether the game was perfect, it was that you were playing together. Kids bickered over rules, parents stepped in as referees, and everyone laughed when the makeshift pieces fell apart mid-game. The creativity needed to keep these games alive was half the fun. Someone would insist that using a bottle cap instead of a game piece was cheating, while another argued that it gave them special powers. It was noisy, chaotic, and often ended with someone storming off, but the memories stuck. Poor families in the 1970s could not afford to replace broken games or buy new ones, so they improvised. And in the process, they made the games uniquely their own. Those evenings at the kitchen table with the dim light overhead and the radio playing softly in the background were proof that joy came not from perfect conditions, but from the people you shared them with. Roller skating on sidewalks was a thrill that turned every cracked stretch of pavement into an adventure. The skates were simple, cheap models that clamped onto your shoes with a little key you always managed to misplace. They were noisy, they pinched your feet, and they never felt quite secure. But once you got rolling, none of that mattered. Kids zoomed down driveways, wobbled along sidewalks, and occasionally crashed into hedges or lampposts, laughing the whole time. Poor kids did not need a roller rink with flashing lights and music. The street outside was their playground. Neighbors got used to the clatter of wheels, the shouts of kids daring each other to go faster, or the occasional cry when someone took a tumble. Skinned knees were badges of honor, proof that you were brave enough to try tricks or push yourself just a little faster. On warm weekends, it seemed like half the block was out skating, sharing keys, swapping wheels, or helping each other up after a fall. Looking back, those clunky sidewalk skates were more than toys. They were freedom, adventure, and laughter all rolled into one. Backyard camping with old blankets was the closest many kids came to an actual vacation. Families who could not afford a trip to the mountains or a campsite simply made do with what they had. You dragged out old blankets, draped them over chairs or a clothesline, and called it a tent. Flashlights became lanterns, and jars with holes in the lid became prisons for lightning bugs. You roasted marshmallows if you could afford them, or just pretended by holding sticks over a candle. The crickets chirped, the night air grew cool, and the stars overhead seemed brighter when you were lying flat on the ground. Sometimes the tent collapsed halfway through the night, sometimes the damp grass soaked through, but no one cared. It was all part of the adventure. Parents watched from the porch, amused by the drama of kids swearing they would spend the whole night outside only to sneak back inside before midnight. Backyard camping cost nothing, but it gave kids the same excitement as any trip far away. For families stretched thin in the 1970s, those nights under the stars proved that wonder did not require money, just imagination. Hiking or exploring the woods near home was one of those timeless adventures that cost nothing but gave kids everything. Even if it was just a few acres of scraggly trees behind a row of houses or a patch of brush near the railroad tracks, to a child's imagination it was an untamed wilderness. Kids collected sticks, piled them together into forts, and declared themselves kings or explorers charting unknown land. They carried peanut butter sandwiches or maybe just a canteen filled with warm tap water, and they stayed out until dusk, their parents calling from porches when it was time to come home. The woods became battlefields for stick swords, treasure grounds for bottle caps, or secret hideouts where you whispered plans like real adventurers. Every rustle in the leaves felt like a clue. Every squirrel or rabbit was a wild beast to track, and sometimes you swore you saw something mysterious just beyond the tree line. These explorations gave kids a taste of freedom, the feeling that they could go anywhere and do anything, even if they never left their small town. For poor kids in the 1970s, a hike did not mean mountains and state parks. It meant backyard wilderness turned into endless stories. Homemade talent shows in the living room turned Saturday nights into performances fit for a theater, even if the stage was just a sheet draped across the couch. Brothers and sisters sang, danced, or told corny jokes, and the audience was usually mom, dad, and whoever happened to be visiting. Costumes came out of closets, wigs were made of towels, and microphones were nothing more than a wooden spoon. Some kids took it seriously, practicing for hours, while others just enjoyed being silly, making everyone laugh until they cried. Parents clapped no matter how off-key the singing or how awkward the dance steps, because it was never about perfection. Sometimes there were prizes, maybe a cookie for the winner, or the honor of not doing dishes that night. These shows turned an ordinary living room into a place where creativity, pride, and family warmth shone brightest. Poor families could not buy tickets to concerts or Broadway, but they made their own entertainment, and it was often better than anything money could buy. Hand-me-down baseball gloves and pickup games filled empty lots and schoolyards with shouts of joy. The gloves were worn thin, sometimes stitched together with string, and the baseballs were often scuffed beyond recognition. But none of that mattered when you had enough kids to field a game. Someone would drag out old bats, a rock became home plate, and the dusty lot transformed into a major league stadium. Kids argued over who would pitch, who got stuck in the outfield, and whether a hit counted as fair or foul. Even if the teams were uneven, the game went on, inning after inning, until the ball was too lost in the shadows to see. Parents leaned on fences, watching and smiling, glad to see their kids occupied without needing a penny spent. The thrill of hitting the ball, rounding the makeshift bases, and sliding into home left memories as strong as any professional game. Poor kids in the 1970s did not need uniforms or perfect fields. They just needed a little space, a lot of energy, and each other. Chalk drawings on driveways were the art shows of the neighborhood, and all you needed was a handful of colored sticks from the dime store. Kids drew hopscotch grids, doodled flowers and houses, or sketched giant racetracks for toy cars to zoom across. Chalk dust covered your hands, knees, and sometimes even your face, but it washed away easily with the next rainstorm. The impermanence of it made each drawing special, like you were creating something meant only for that day. Friends competed over who could make the biggest hopscotch path or the silliest cartoon character, cheering and laughing as the creations grew across the pavement. Sometimes, you were proud enough to call your parents outside to admire your masterpiece, and they always smiled, even if they were really just admiring the joy on your face. For poor families, chalk was one of the cheapest investments you could make, yet it gave hours of fun and expression. It turned gray concrete into a canvas, letting kids imagine they were artists without needing galleries or supplies. Church carnivals and potlucks were social events that brought whole communities together for free fun. The churchyard filled with rickety rides, ring toss games, and tables stacked high with cakes and pies. Children darted between booths clutching raffle tickets, hoping to win small prizes like a toy or a homemade quilt. The food was endless. Casseroles, salads, and fried chicken brought by families who cooked with love, even if they had little to spare. Music played from speakers, neighbors chatted, and laughter mixed with the sounds of squeaky Ferris wheels. For many poor families in the 1970s, these gatherings were the closest thing to a festival they could attend. There was no entrance fee, no need to worry about buying dinner, and no judgment for bringing simple dishes. The spirit of sharing meant everyone left full, happy, and a little more connected to the people around them. These events gave kids magical memories of bright lights and full plates without costing their parents a cent. Watching free fireworks at the park was the highlight of summer holidays, especially the 4th of July. Families carried blankets, packed leftover sandwiches, and found a spot on the grass long before the show began. Kids ran around with sparklers or glow sticks while parents chatted and kept an eye on the crowd. Neighbors who barely spoke during the year suddenly felt like family, sharing bug spray, blankets, and stories as the night went on. The whole town seemed to breathe together in anticipation, waiting for that first explosion in the sky. Then, as the sky darkened, everyone leaned back and looked up together. The first boom echoed, and brilliant colors lit the night sky, drawing gasps from children who felt like they were watching magic. It did not matter that you were sitting on itchy grass or swatting mosquitoes. The beauty above was all anyone cared about. For families who could not afford amusement parks or big outings, these public fireworks were a gift. They created the kind of awe that no amount of money could improve because it was shared by thousands at once. In the 1970s, those nights of explosions and laughter reminded everyone that joy could be free. Window shopping at the mall was a weekend ritual for poor families who could not afford to buy much but still wanted to feel part of the excitement. You wandered past shiny displays, admiring clothes, shoes, and gadgets you only dreamed of owning. Kids pressed noses to the toy store window, making mental wish lists, while parents pretended not to notice the disappointment. Even though you knew most of it was out of reach, there was still a thrill in imagining what it might feel like to own it. The mall was not just a place to shop, it was a place to dream, a world of possibility wrapped in glass and neon lights. Sometimes you splurged on one treat, like a single soft pretzel or a shared ice cream cone, stretching the moment out so it lasted. Escalators became rides, fountains were meeting spots, and department stores offered free entertainment with their endless counters of samples and testers. It was not about shopping. It was about being together, imagining, and enjoying the bustle of the mall without spending more than $1. For poor families, it was an outing that cost almost nothing but still felt like an event. Listening to records from the library was a hidden gem of the 1970s, a way for music lovers to experience albums they could not afford to buy. The vinyl came in worn cardboard sleeves with library stamps and scuffs from countless plays, but that only added to the charm. At home, you placed the record on a hand-me-down turntable, carefully set the needle, and listened as the crackle gave way to music. The tiny imperfections in the sound, the hiss, the pop, the skip, were part of the magic, almost like the record was alive. Every play felt like a performance, something unique that would never sound quite the same again. Families gathered in living rooms, swaying or singing along, and sometimes kids taped the songs onto cassettes so they could replay them later. Borrowing records meant you could explore different styles, rock, jazz, classical, without paying a dime. For kids who dreamed of owning stacks of albums, the library gave a taste of that world, one borrowed record at a time. It was proof that even poor families could fill their homes with music, laughter, and rhythm without breaking the budget. Neighborhood car wash fundraisers were part work, part fun, and all about community spirit. Kids grabbed buckets, soap, and sponges, set up homemade signs on street corners, and waved down passing cars. For a couple of dollars, they scrubbed every inch, splashing each other with hoses and turning the chore into a game. Every so often, someone's dad would pull up in a dusty car just to give the kids a big job, grinning as the crew went to work. The satisfaction of seeing a shining car drive away made you feel like you had accomplished something that mattered. The work was messy, the water was often cold, and someone always ended up soaked, but the laughter never stopped. Sometimes the money went toward a school trip or a sports team, but often it was just pocket change to split between friends. Parents supervised, offering tips on rinsing and polishing, while neighbors drove by just to support the kids. For poor families in the 1970s, this was a way to teach responsibility, earn a little cash, and bond with friends all at once. And nothing felt better than finishing the day tired, wet, and proud of what you accomplished. Patching clothes together as a family was a quiet but important part of life when money was tight. Moms hauled out the sewing machine, while kids sorted scraps of fabric or threaded needles. Holes in jeans were patched with mismatched squares, shirts were restitched, and sometimes hand-me-downs were altered to fit younger siblings. What might have looked shabby to outsiders was seen at home as a badge of care, proof that nothing and no one was disposable. The sound of scissors snipping and fabric being pulled taught kids the rhythm of thrift, the heartbeat of survival. The work could take hours, but it was filled with chatter, laughter, and the hum of the machine. Some kids learned to sew simple stitches themselves, taking pride in helping keep the family wardrobe alive. While wealthier families bought new clothes each season, poor families made every shirt and pair of pants last as long as possible. These patched garments were more than clothes. They were symbols of resourcefulness, care, and family effort. Looking back, those evenings spent mending were about more than fabric. They were about love stitched into every seam. Sunday afternoon drives just to look were the kind of simple tradition families cherished in the 1970s. Dad would fill the tank with just a few bucks, barely enough to cover a couple gallons, and pile everyone into the car. The ride itself was the adventure. Windows rolled down, the breeze whipping your hair, the radio playing whatever station the antenna could catch, and no one really caring about where they ended up. Families drove past new neighborhoods, pointing at houses they dreamed of one day owning. They cruised by farmland, admiring rows of crops or herds of cows grazing lazily. Sometimes the drive was about showing the kids where mom or dad had grown up, circling past old schools or favorite hangouts. Other times it was just to break the monotony of sitting at home on a tight budget. Kids argued in the back seat, someone always asking if they were there yet, even though there was never really a destination. The gas gauge dipped low, but Dad stretched every mile, knowing the drive itself was the treat. For families without money for vacations or outings, these drives were a way to escape, to dream, and to spend time together without spending much at all. Kite flying with homemade kites was another way kids turned scraps into magic. There was no trip to the toy store, no brightly colored store-bought kites, just old newspapers, a couple sticks, string, and tape. You fashioned a diamond shape, tied it tight, and prayed it would hold against the wind. On blustery afternoons, kids ran across fields or down streets, pulling the string until the fragile creation caught a gust. Sometimes it soared high, tugging against your hand like it had a mind of its own. Other times it nosedived into the dirt, crumpled, and had to be patched together before the next attempt. The laughter came either way, because the joy was in the chase, the running, and the thrill of watching something you made fly. Friends compared whose kite went higher, whose stayed up longest, or whose looked the silliest, decorated with crayons. Parents watched from porches, smiling as the sky filled with scraps of newspaper fluttering like birds. For poor families in the 1970s, kites meant freedom, creativity, and a rare kind of triumph, proof that even with almost nothing, you could make something that touched the clouds. Watching reruns together on a single television was a family ritual in homes that often had just one set for everyone. The television itself was usually a bulky box with dials, rabbit ear antennas wrapped in aluminum foil, and a fuzzy screen that needed a smack on the side to work properly. Entire families crowded into the living room, kids sprawled on the carpet, parents on the couch, maybe an older sibling leaning against the wall. There was no arguing over channels. Most homes only got a handful, and reruns of old sitcoms or variety shows were a guarantee. Families laughed together at jokes they had heard dozens of times, sang along with jingles, or sat in silence during dramatic scenes. The glow of the screen filled the room, and even though the shows were repeats, the feeling of watching together was always fresh. Snacks were rare, maybe popcorn popped on the stove or crackers with cheese, but the real treat was the togetherness. Poor families did not need multiple televisions or cable subscriptions. One screen, one channel, and one shared experience were more than enough to bring everyone closer. Looking back, those rerun nights were less about the shows themselves and more about the memories made sitting side by side. Visiting garage sales was like treasure hunting on a budget, and poor families in the 1970s embraced it wholeheartedly. Every weekend, neighborhoods sprouted makeshift shops on front lawns, tables covered with knickknacks, clothes, toys, and books. For kids, the thrill was in rummaging through boxes of mismatched action figures, worn board games, or stacks of comic books that cost only a quarter. Parents searched for kitchenware, furniture, or clothes that could be patched and reused. Sometimes you found exactly what you were hoping for: a new-to-you bike, a lamp, or a winter coat for cheap. Other times it was about the thrill of the hunt, walking away with something you did not know you wanted until you saw it. Bargaining was part of the fun too, shaving a few cents off the price while chatting with neighbors. Families made entire outings of it, hopping from sale to sale, comparing finds, and laughing at the odd treasures on display. Garage sales offered a chance to bring home something new without straining the family budget. For kids, it felt like Christmas morning on an ordinary Saturday. Proof that joy could be found in someone else's leftovers. Fishing at the local creek or pond was a weekend staple for families who needed an activity that cost almost nothing. Cheap bait, worms dug up from the backyard, or a can of corn was enough to get started. The fishing poles were often borrowed, bent, or homemade with string tied to a stick. Kids sat on muddy banks, lines dangling into still water, waiting for the thrill of a tug. Sometimes hours passed with no bite, but that never seemed to matter. The quiet moments were filled with skipping stones, watching dragonflies, or telling stories while the sun glinted off the water. When a fish finally did take the bait, the excitement was electric. Shouts, splashes, and the scramble to reel it in before it wriggled free. Parents used the time to teach patience, to share stories of their own childhoods, and to pass down the simple skills of living close to the land. The catch of the day might be small or even thrown back, but the memories stuck. For poor families in the 1970s, a few hours by the water provided peace, joy, and togetherness without costing more than the walk to get there. Church bells rang through town like a memory you could not shake. You always heard them. Always. It did not matter if you were inside or outside, awake or half asleep. They cut through the noise, soft, low, peaceful, like someone reminding you, it's Sunday, time to gather. It was not just a call to worship, it was a call to stillness. The bells made you stop whatever you were doing, even if just for a second. Bikes slowed, conversations paused. Grown-ups looked toward the sound without even realizing it. Some people crossed themselves, some bowed their heads, others just nodded and kept walking, like they had heard from an old friend. You did not need to go to church to feel the moment. The sound itself carried something sacred. It was not just a call to worship. It was a call to stillness, to reflection, to putting on your best and showing up. Not everyone went to church, but everyone heard those bells. They drifted through kitchen windows, past front porches, across quiet streets. You could almost set your clock to them. And in a world before push notifications, those bells told you what really mattered. They were tradition, community, and reverence, all wrapped in a single sound. And when they stopped, the stillness lingered. Once upon a time, thumbing a ride was just another way to get around. You stuck out your arm, trusted a stranger, and ended up somewhere new. In the 1970s, hitchhiking was woven into the fabric of American youth culture. It was impulsive, bold, and strangely ordinary. Backpackers with handwritten cardboard signs, college students heading home for the weekend, young dreamers chasing concerts, freedom, or just a place to sleep that night. The road was a friend, not a threat. Of course, it came with risk, but so did living. Trust was the currency of the era. You paid with eye contact, conversation, and the silent agreement that we were all just trying to get somewhere. Today, the idea seems reckless, dangerous, unthinkable. Our paranoia has grown louder than our sense of community. Stories of harm and headlines of fear took the wheel, and the open road became a closed door. But ask anyone who stuck out their thumb back then, and they will tell you about the kindness of strangers, the rides that turned into friendships, and the way the world felt a little more connected. Hitchhiking was not just transportation. It was a dare, a freedom, and a story you told for the rest of your life. Scratch and sniff stickers made notebooks smell like fruit salad, or something pretending to be. Grape, banana, pizza, popcorn, if it existed, there was probably a sticker that gave off a chemical approximation of it. These tiny scented rewards were currency on the playground. You earned them from teachers, you traded them with friends, you collected them in sticker books and flipped through your favorites like a sommelier of glue and artificial scent. Some smelled better than others. Some were so strong they made your eyes water. Others lost their smell after a few scratches but were kept anyway, honored like faded trophies. You knew the popular ones: root beer, bubble gum, and anything with glitter. You also knew the duds, like liverwurst or mystery meat, that somehow ended up in your binder anyway. Scratching a sticker in class was a quiet act of rebellion. You were not supposed to, but you did. And then you passed the notebook around so others could sniff and nod in approval, or gag in horror. Scratch and sniff stickers were low-tech fun with high nostalgic value. They turned paper into treasure. And even today, one whiff of fake strawberry is enough to transport you straight back to third grade with a smile. Before the sleek inline skates of the 1990s, there were the clunky, lovable roller skates with metal wheels. They strapped over your shoes with thick leather buckles and screeched across every surface like they were mad at the floor. If you skated indoors, you sounded like a marching band. If you braved the sidewalk, every crack was a threat. But none of that mattered. Because once you got going, it was freedom. You were flying, wobbling, yes, but flying. These skates had no padding, no ankle support, and no mercy. But they came with memories, rolling through driveways, circling the garage, racing your siblings until someone wiped out. You remember the sound they made on concrete, the clatter as you tried to stop, the feeling of falling and getting back up anyway. Roller discos made them iconic. Kids and teens glided under colored lights, surrounded by Bee Gees and Donna Summer, feeling cooler than they ever had. You might have never mastered the spin. You probably fell more than you want to admit. But those skates, those metal-wheeled monstrosities, were the soundtrack to a whole chapter of growing up. They were heavy, loud, and impossible to forget. Before the Marvel Cinematic Universe, before endless superhero reboots, there were the Super Friends, a team of caped crusaders who met at the Hall of Justice every Saturday morning to fight crime and teach morals along the way. Superman, Batman, Wonder Woman, Aquaman, all voiced with booming authority and unwavering goodness. It was not about grit, it was about greatness. The animation was stiff, the stories were simple, but that did not matter. To 1970s kids, this was the Justice League. This was how you learned right from wrong. Every episode ended with a lesson, a reminder to share, to be brave, to tell the truth. The villains were rarely scary. What mattered was how the heroes responded, with courage, teamwork, and always a plan. Super Friends made you believe in justice, not as an abstract concept, but as something you could live out. On the playground, in your house, in your heart. It was not just fantasy, it was a moral compass. And those heroic theme songs still live somewhere in the back of every grown-up's mind. It made you believe that heroes were real, and that maybe, just maybe, you could be one too. Sunday afternoons were not for errands, they were for visiting. You loaded into the car or walked across town to your aunt's house, your cousin's, or maybe grandma's. No call ahead, no appointment, you just showed up with a pie, a hug, and a smile. The door was always open, the coffee pot always on. Sometimes there was a cake on the counter, sometimes just conversation. But either way, you stayed a while. Kids played outside, women gathered in the kitchen, and the men sat with coffee talking about nothing in particular. Nobody was in a hurry. Nobody checked the time. Because on Sundays, being together was the point. It was how you stayed connected, how you passed down stories, and how you reminded each other that family was not just a word, it was a ritual. A giant screen under the stars, the crackle of a tinny speaker hanging from your car window, the smell of popcorn, engine exhaust, and summer sweat. If you were lucky enough to grow up in the 1970s, drive-in theaters were your ticket to freedom. $5 for a night out, a movie, and maybe even a first kiss. Families packed into station wagons with lawn chairs and blankets. Teenagers showed up in Mustangs and Chevelles trying to act like James Dean. No one cared if you wore pajamas or brought your own snacks. It was casual magic. A patch of gravel turned into an oasis of glowing screens and shared laughter. And when the second feature came on and the kids were asleep in the back seat, parents finally got a little peace. The whole experience was slow, dreamy, and entirely unlike anything we have today. Today's theaters are cramped and overpriced. Streaming has replaced the ritual. But back then, watching a movie meant being together. There was no pausing, no rewinding. Just you, the screen, and whoever was sitting beside you. The sounds of crickets and car horns mixed with dialogue, and it all felt okay. Now, drive-ins are a fading relic, abandoned lots with crumbling screens and silence where community once lived. How did something so ordinary feel so perfect and become so rare? Slap bracelets were the toy that hit your wrist and hit peak popularity almost overnight. They were simple, a metal strip wrapped in colorful fabric that snapped around your arm with one satisfying motion. One moment it was straight, the next it curled tight, clinging to your wrist like a coiled snake. Every kid had one. Some had dozens, trading them like currency during recess. They came in neon colors, animal prints, sparkles, and cartoon characters. The louder the snap, the better. Some kids got so good they could slap them onto their arms without looking. But with popularity came problems. Schools started banning them. Parents worried about the metal underneath. Rumors flew about kids cutting themselves open with a rogue bracelet that had been peeled apart. That only made them cooler. Everyone wanted the forbidden accessory. Teachers tried to confiscate them, but they always found their way back into backpacks and onto arms. Slap bracelets were fun, fast, and a little dangerous, just enough to feel rebellious. They were not just toys. They were fashion statements, fidget tools, and tiny thrills rolled into one. And even now, the sound of that sharp snap is enough to take you right back to 4th grade. If you remember Clacker toys, you probably also remember getting smacked in the face. These were two solid acrylic balls connected by a string, meant to be swung up and down until they clacked together above and below your hand. That was the whole toy. No batteries, no screen. Just two hard spheres ready to leave a bruise. And kids loved them. The louder and faster they clacked, the cooler you were. It was a skill to master. Get the rhythm right, and you could keep them going for minutes. Get it wrong, and you got a nasty surprise. Parents hated them. Teachers banned them. Hospitals probably kept a few on hand just to demonstrate what not to do. They were loud, dangerous, and oddly satisfying. For a few wild years, clackers were everywhere, on sidewalks, in classrooms, and hidden under beds when they got taken away. Eventually, safety concerns shut them down, but not before a generation got their fill of noise and near misses. They were outlawed in some places, but that only made them cooler. If you ever got them moving just right, you remember the thrill, and maybe a headache to go with it. They were chaos in toy form, and we would not have had it any other way. The Brady Bunch was a family like no other, and yet it felt like everyone's family. 6 kids, 2 parents, and a house full of laughter, chaos, and pastel-colored drama. Premiering in 1969, but becoming a cultural mainstay throughout the 1970s, it was pure television comfort food. Every episode ended with a smile, a hug, and a catchy lesson on sharing, honesty, or sibling rivalry. It was not edgy. It was not deep. But it was warm. And for kids whose homes were not always so perfect, the Brady Bunch offered a glimpse of what harmony could look like, even if it was idealized. Mike and Carol never yelled. Alice the housekeeper always had a one-liner ready. And the kids? They were just messy enough to be real. You picked a favorite. You sang along with the theme song. You quoted Jan's iconic "Marcia, Marcia, Marcia." It was pop culture innocence. A time capsule of bell-bottoms, perms, and avocado-colored kitchens. And even if you rolled your eyes at the cheese, deep down you loved that family, because they showed that even the most blended bunch could belong. And that felt revolutionary in its own gentle way. You could smell them before you saw them. Pies cooling on the windowsill, apple, cherry, maybe lemon meringue with a wavy golden top. Sunday was baking day for many households, and nothing said home like the scent of fresh pie drifting through the screen. You watched it cool like it was a countdown. You hoped no bugs landed. You hoped no one snuck a finger in for a taste. The crust was always a little uneven. The filling sometimes bubbled over. And that made it perfect. You knew it was made with care because you saw it happen. From flour to fork. That pie meant the week was done. That everything would be okay for one more day. You did not need a bakery. You had mom's apron, a rolling pin, and a recipe card passed down through generations. And somehow, every slice tasted like love. Nature was not an excursion. It was your backyard, your escape, your everyday. In the 1970s, kids built forts in the woods, caught frogs in creeks, and came home with dirt under every nail. You did not need a guidebook or a permit. You just went. Parents did not ask where, and you would not have known how to answer anyway. You were not trying to get grounded. You were already in the ground, climbing trees, jumping rocks, wading through poison ivy without a second thought. Nature was not a classroom, it was a kingdom. No sunscreen, no hydration plan, just freedom. Exploration was a birthright, not a weekend event, and it built something in us. Resilience, curiosity, respect. Today, access to nature feels like a luxury. Locked gates, expensive gear, screens that convince us we have seen it all. But nothing replaces the smell of wet soil after rain, the sound of wind in tall grass, the feeling that you are the only person for miles, and maybe, for a moment, you were. Payphone predicaments were a daily part of life before everyone had a phone in their pocket. You needed a quarter, maybe two, and a working booth to make a call. No signal bars, no group texts, just a heavy receiver, a scratchy dial tone, and sometimes a sticky keypad. Finding a payphone that was not broken or graffitied felt like a small miracle. If you were lucky, it worked on the first try. If not, you banged the receiver, tried again, and hoped your coins did not disappear into the void. Making a collect call meant saying your name faster than humanly possible. "Hello, mother, please pick me up right now," before the machine cut you off. Privacy was non-existent. Everyone could hear your conversation. Rain? You ducked into the booth and hoped it did not smell like sadness and cigarette smoke. Nighttime? Good luck. The glow of the payphone sign was a lonely beacon, but it was all we had. We memorized numbers. We waited in line. We scrounged for change in pockets and glove compartments, and when the call finally went through, it felt like a victory. Payphones were clunky, inconvenient, and unreliable. But they were also our lifeline, 1 quarter at a time. Long before music was digital, it spun on plastic. Record players with built-in speakers were the backbone of every teenager's room and every family living room. They were bulky, boxy, and usually brown or beige. But when you placed that needle on the groove, the room changed. You might remember hearing the Jackson 5, the Carpenters, or Fleetwood Mac for the very first time through one of these machines. The sound was warm, slightly fuzzy, and crackled at the edges, but it was alive. Kids would stack their 45s, adjust the tone arm, and lower the needle with care. These were not sleek devices. They were furniture. Some had lids that closed like a suitcase. Others had knobs you had to gently coax into the right spot. Volume? Not much. But intimacy? All the way. You sat close to it. You knew every skip and scratch on your favorite record. You could play the same song 10 times in a row and it felt new every time. It was not about convenience, it was about connection. The record player was not background noise, it was the centerpiece of your downtime. Hearing one today might just make you stop, listen, and remember who you were when that song first played. Mood rings promise to reveal your soul with nothing but heat-sensitive liquid and a silver band. They hit stores in the 1970s and immediately became a cultural phenomenon. Kids were obsessed. What color was yours? Blue meant calm. Green meant normal. Black meant, well, probably nothing good. But did the colors really reflect your emotions? Of course not. Still, that did not matter. It felt like magic. Like your feelings were finally visible. Like someone could see how you felt without you having to explain it. And in a decade where kids were just starting to explore self-expression, that meant something. Mood rings were not flashy. They were not expensive. But they made you feel seen. Like a tiny piece of jewelry could make sense of the chaos in your chest. You wore it to school. You compared with friends. You checked it constantly. Not because it worked, but because you wanted it to. It became part of your identity. And even though you knew deep down it was just science reacting to body temperature, you believed the story. That was the power of being a kid in the 1970s. You let the world be strange and beautiful and just a little bit magical. Religious programming was part of the fabric of Sunday. You might hear it early in the morning, voices singing, scripture being read, or it might come on the television just after lunch, soft-spoken preachers, choirs in long robes, and messages about grace, patience, and love. Nobody shouted. Nobody sold anything. It was quiet, slow, and thoughtful. Even if you were just passing through the room, it sank in. A verse, a line, a hymn. Sometimes the voice on the radio made you feel like you were the only one listening, like it was meant just for you. You heard phrases like peace that passes understanding and blessed assurance, and though you didn't fully get it, something about the rhythm stayed with you. The music was slow and steady, nothing to dance to, but something to feel. Parents turned it on not as entertainment, but as atmosphere. A little light, a little calm, a little nudge to be better before Monday hit. It was a pause button for your thoughts, your nerves, your whole house. It stayed with you longer than you expected. It was comfort food for the spirit, warm and familiar. And in a time when not everyone had a Bible, the radio or TV brought one right into your living room. You may not have watched the whole thing, but you listened, or at least you felt it. In the 1970s, music was not streamed. It was passed hand to hand, wrapped in plastic and personality. If you wanted someone to know you, really know you, you made them a mixtape. It was your heart, your taste, your weekend nights recorded onto a cassette, labeled in loopy handwriting, maybe with a little doodle in the corner. The songs were not chosen at random, they were curated. A love letter in reverse, a rebellion in tracklist form, and if you had a boombox, well, you were the DJ of your own little world, blasting your favorites at the park, by the pool, or on your front steps while friends gathered around. No earbuds, no privacy. It was communal, public, and proud. You shared music, literally. Tapes swapped between friends, rewound with a pencil when they jammed, passed around at school, duplicated in living rooms. Music lived in bedrooms, on shelves, in glove compartments. Now, everything is instant and infinite. And yet, it feels like we lost the ritual. That sense of effort, that warm hiss of analog sound. The physicality of pressing record and hoping your brother did not walk in talking while your favorite song played on the radio. Today's playlists may be convenient, but they are missing the fingerprints, the memories, the awkward pauses and joy of discovering someone else's world, one track at a time. Mixtapes were handwritten love letters wrapped in cassette cases. You waited by the radio for hours just to hit record at the perfect moment, trying to catch the start of your favorite song without the DJ talking over it. You rewound, replayed, and carefully curated the perfect order so each track melted into the next. Some were made for crushes, others for best friends. Some were sorry tapes, and some were just because. Each one had a theme, a purpose, and a heart behind it. You picked songs that said what you could not. Then you labeled the tape in your best handwriting, maybe decorated the case, and handed it over like it was treasure. Because it was. A great mixtape took hours, sometimes days, to get just right. And when someone gave you one, you listened to it until the tape wore thin and the sound warped. Mixtapes were not just music. They were memories, feelings, time capsules wrapped in magnetic ribbon. And long after the songs faded, you remembered the person who made it, their handwriting, their choices, their message. Even now, in a world of playlists, nothing hits quite like the soft click of a tape deck and a song you once recorded just for someone else. Mood rings promised to read your soul. Slip one on, and suddenly your finger was a window into your emotions. Or so we thought. The magic came from a tiny, color-changing stone set into a thick metal or plastic band. It shifted hues depending on temperature, but as kids, we believed it told the truth. If it turned blue, you were calm. If it went black, you were angry. Green? Maybe in love. We studied those little charts that came with the ring like they were sacred scrolls. Every recess and sleepover had at least one person interpreting moods. Sure, the science was sketchy, and sure, it mostly just reflected how cold or hot your hands were, but to us, it was real magic. It felt like the ring knew something we did not. Every kid had one, lost one, or begged their parents to buy one from a gas station or gift shop. The band turned your finger green eventually, but you wore it anyway. It was a talisman, a tiny crystal mood detector that let you feel seen, even if it was just a gimmick. To this day, nothing quite compares to the mystery and wonder packed into one shimmering, shifting little stone. Only in the 1970s could a rock become a celebrity. The pet rock craze of 1975 was so absurd it made sense. For just under $4, you could buy a smooth gray stone nestled in a cardboard box with breathing holes and a care manual. It had no eyes, no mouth, no tricks, and kids adored it. Why? Maybe because it was funny, maybe because it was simple, or maybe, deep down, it was because even the most ordinary thing could feel special with enough imagination. Children gave their pet rocks names, personalities, backstories. They were carried in pockets, introduced to friends, given beds made from shoeboxes. Some kids genuinely believed their rock understood them. It never talked back. It never judged. It just was. And in a world of flashing toys and plastic noise, the pet rock was oddly peaceful. A quiet rebellion against doing too much, against always needing more. It reminded kids that anything could be a toy if you loved it enough. The pet rock was not a gimmick. It was a mirror. It showed how much kids could create out of nothing. And somehow, that silly little stone became one of the most unforgettable fads in history. Sunday comics were not just funny, they were a family event. The newspaper hit the porch with a thump, and before the front page was even read, the comic section was pulled out, folded open, and placed right in the middle of the table. It was the only time anyone fought over the funny pages. You read them out loud in silly voices, trading strips with siblings and laughing at the same corny jokes every week. Your dad would chuckle at Blondie. Your mom would pretend not to like The Far Side, but always read it twice. And if Peanuts was especially good, someone might cut it out and stick it to the fridge. Sometimes you colored in the comics, even if you were not supposed to. You'd underline your favorite panels, clip out jokes to put in your binder, or trace Garfield's face like you were an artist. If someone messed up the fold or creased your favorite strip, it was war. The 1970s did not care for stiff collars or pressed slacks. It was a decade where fashion rebelled in every direction. Bell-bottoms, crop tops, denim jackets, tie-dye, flowing skirts, and no bras in sight. You could walk into a grocery store barefoot and no one would blink. Schools loosened their grip. Workplaces eased up. Suddenly, expression trumped etiquette. Clothes became loud, soft, bright, ragged, whatever you wanted them to be. Fashion was not dictated by glossy ads. It was discovered at thrift stores, passed down from older siblings, or made at home with scissors and hope. There was no one look. There were thousands. Everyone seemed to be trying something. Maybe failing, but trying. It was messy, but honest, and freeing. Today we have trends, influencers, and curated closets. But back then, you wore what felt like you. No fear of judgment, no uniform to blend into, just a quiet confidence that your clothes could be loud for you. We might be more stylish now, but are we more ourselves? Rubik's Cubes sat on coffee tables like miniature monuments to frustration. Their colorful sides promised fun, but more often delivered rage. You twisted, you turned, you thought you had it, and then disaster. One wrong move sent you back to square one. Solving it became a badge of honor. If someone at school could actually complete a Rubik's Cube, they were treated like a genius. Crowds gathered, applause broke out, but most of us faked it. We peeled off the stickers and rearranged them to make it look solved, or we popped out the pieces and snapped them back into place. Technically cheating? Maybe. Spiritually rewarding? Absolutely. There were books, guides, even videos explaining how to beat the cube, but few had the patience. And yet, we all kept trying. Rubik's Cubes lived in junk drawers, backpacks, and classroom desks. They were part toy, part puzzle, part stress test. Looking back, they were frustrating, addictive, and completely iconic. And to this day, if you spot one on a shelf, Your hands remember the rhythm of twist, turn, twist, even if your brain still has no idea how to actually solve it. If these memories brought a smile to your face, share your own favorite 1970s weekend activity in the comments. Give this video a like to keep the nostalgia alive, and subscribe so we can keep reliving the moments money could never buy.